very special episode. This is going to be another installment of the Against Bitcoin series, or the Steelmanning Bitcoin Objections series. What we've been doing is just basically pulling out some of the objections that we get and just trying to absolutely steelman them, try to present them in the most positive, plausible, biblical, rational way, and then examine them and cross-examine them. So we did this with kind of just initially the concept of this entire podcast, or this podcast series, of like, why in the world should you listen to us? We justified that. Then we went this past, or I guess episode 1 was about uncertain riches, Bitcoin's volatility, and prudent stewardship. There's a lot of people that object to Bitcoin's volatility as a reason for Christians not to have anything to do with it. So we kind of went and looked at that. If you haven't seen that episode, go find that on YouTube or Twitter or other places where such things are found. And today, I want to we have another episode. So Bondor, why don't you introduce yourself for those who aren't familiar with your work?
So Bondor, I love Jesus. I've been in Bitcoin for a long time now. I'm a host on the Better Buy Bitcoin podcast. I've put together, you might be able to see it behind me, I have a high availability Bitcoin node behind me, which is a very high-end node. And then also I've put together a website called Stack Math, which is going to be out there, or which is out there. You can follow me on Twitter at Gilded Plebe. And
Tell the people where they're going to be hearing about Stack Math. You told this to me yesterday, and I was pumped for you. I'm stunned.
Might be on the Stephen Livera podcast. So
Stephen Livera, let's go.
Should be coming up. Yeah.
So look forward to that. Go find the guy. All right. So today we are going to be getting into. And I guess for those who maybe not know, my name is Jordan Bush. I am the executive director of TGFB Media. We exist to help Christians understand and use Bitcoin for the glory of God and the good of people everywhere. Without further ado, today we're going to be looking at the case against Bitcoin based on rendering unto Caesar. Okay, Bitcoin's subversion of governmental authority. This is we do get this one. Bitcoin is like this radical, stateless money. It's got kind of this anarcho-capitalist feel, anti-government, something along these lines. This is so goes the argument, so goes the objection. So I'll let you kind of unpack this objection, and then you can take it where you want to.
Sure. So here we go. Christians throughout the ages have recognized the biblical mandate to submit to government authorities. Bitcoin's design and philosophy, however, presents a concerning challenge to this clear scriptural teaching. This examination explores how Bitcoin's fundamental architecture and purpose may stand in direct opposition to the Christian's duty to honor government authority as ordained by God. So again, first we're going to go through what the Bible says about the larger topic, which is authorities and how God has established authorities in his created order. Yep. Then we're going to look at the argument against applying those biblical principles against Bitcoin and how they could create a case that says, hey, this is not Bitcoin is not congruous with the rest of Scripture, and therefore we should push it aside or not participate or protest against it, if you will. And then we will be refuting that case and looking at it.
If there is a case to be refuted. I mean, we might just
sure.
we might just sell all of our Bitcoin before the end of this call.
Yeah, we might talk ourselves out of it, hopefully. If we do this right. Yeah. Okay. So want to get into it?
Let's do it. Go for it. First principle.
Well, 5 principles again.
5 principles total.
We really gotta like jump in on the top of the show and just be like, we gotta eliminate some of these principles. Like that's right. I mean, it's good to try and present the steel man case, like really try and get in there, but apologies if it just gets too much in the weeds. Here we go. 5 principles. Divine ordination of government, the Christian's Christian's duty of submission, rendering to Caesar, promoting order, not chaos, and honoring authority as a witness. Okay, so first principle, divine ordination of government. Romans 13, 1 through 2 is unequivocal. Let every person be subject to the government authorities,
Yeah.
For there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. Government is not a human invention, but a divine institution.
Mm.
So, first biblical principle, very clear, right?
Yeah.
This is not, we're not
correct. Well, you're not going to hear any arguments from us. Again, there are probably a lot of people who, really quickly want to jump to, provisos. But again, we're going to get there. But for right now, this is a good and true thing. Government is from God. God has created government. This is not something humans came up with. This is designed to be a gift. Obviously, gifts can be abused. We will fully acknowledge that. But again, we don't have to say, this is something that a lot of people get caught up in. You don't have to say everything in order to say true things. Okay. So you don't have to feel like you're getting bullied into, anytime you say anything, you have to say every possible thing that could be said about that. You don't need to feel that kind of guilt that a lot of people want to put on you. So we can just be happy. We can happily agree that God made government and that government is good. Okay. In and of itself,
Indeed.
Just like every other gift, every other perfect gift that God made, government is one of those things, and it is good. So we'll leave it there for now.
Yeah. And then leave it there for now. Obviously, there's implementation details and the rest of
Correct.
that, but we can just
Correct.
Yeah. High level. Okay. Second principle, the Christian's duty of submission. 1 Peter 2:13-17 commands, be subject for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether it be to the emperor as supreme or to governors as sent by him to punish those who do evil and to praise those who do good. As John Calvin wrote in his Institutions, paraphrase, the first duty of subjects towards their magistrates is to entertain the most honorable thoughts of their function, recognizing it as a delegation or a delegated jurisdiction from God. Again, this is building on the first point, and it's taking it a little bit further, right? Be subject. Yeah. Okay. These are, God puts these people in authority. We need to be under their authority. And thinking rightly of them, thinking highly of them. Your honor, right? Like this is not to be taken lightly. There's civilization and organization and the ordering of civilization is at stake, right? Yep,
exactly. And this is really a really important point, right? Because again, some people might say this is kind of redundant. Well, it's really not. This is just the other side of this coin, right? Authority is from God. That's one side of the coin. And then God intends people, because he created authority, he intends, people to submit themselves to it. This is a good and natural thing. God is a God of order. He's created people to be in hierarchical structures. Not a very thing that people will get excited about in the year of our Lord 2025, but they ought to. And again, another thing to this point is that one of the most famous passages, I believe it's also from Romans 13. You see the Apostle Paul talking about this, basically putting this right next to the same kind of, right in the same place, in the same conversation about the duties to pay taxes. I believe it's something to the effect of, he says, pay taxes to whom taxes are due, revenue to whom revenues are due, honor to whom honor is due, respect to whom respect is due. And so there's a real sense in which honor is a type of tax. It's a type of payment that we ought to render to those who have been appointed and entrusted with authority. So yeah, agree. This is an important thing. Again, we're not debating with this at all. This is a very very important thing. Christians should take this seriously. We shouldn't just joke about making fun of authorities or any of these kind of things. Authorities are designed to be gifts from God. And we ought to submit to them happily and make in an effort to try to make their jobs easy. Because where we, make their jobs easily, similar on a parent with his child front. If those who are being governed, live well and make the job of those who are ruling over us easy, then that's to everyone's benefit.
Indeed. Yep. And that just leads directly into the third principle, which is render to Caesar.
Yep.
When questioned about taxes, Jesus himself declares in Matthew 22:21, therefore render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God. Now, Jordan, I know you have a lot to say on this, and you've said before, and you've written at length on this, and people really should really go check out Jordan's article on this, which is titled.
Yeah. Oh shoot. Render to no, it's not render to God. I have. Oh man, I don't have it right in front of me. Misrendering Jesus is what it's called. Yeah, misrendering Jesus.
Highly recommend the article because it really it lays this clear, which is it is as it's described, right?
Yeah.
Like render in terms of its application for us right now. Render to Caesar what is Caesar's. Okay, he's got a face on the coin. This is Caesar's coin. It's his image. This is his I don't know, call it property or domain, right?
Yeah.
Like
yes. Yeah. So basically the logic behind this has been used throughout human history, but one example is within Egypt. In Egypt, basically as soon as you entered into the land, they had statues. Basically statues is to the farthest limits of the land of Egypt that showed the image of Caesar. And so when you entered into that place, you understood by seeing Caesar's image something that bore Caesar's image, you understood that you were entering into a domain that was governed by him. And so the same logic works with money. So how do you know where you are in the world? One easy way that you can, figure out where you are, generally speaking, is to look at the money that's used in that place. You'll have, it'll have the name of the country. It'll have pictures of famous political figures or other leaders that'll be on the currency. This is a very normal principle that we observe through time. And so again, money that is made by government, there's a real sense in which by virtue of them making it, and by virtue of at least in by virtue of them making it, they do exercise some ownership of that currency, and that is something that ought to be acknowledged.
Indeed. And on the other side of that, the reverse side of that, when you don't acknowledge it, when you don't honor it, you are engaging in a form of, I don't know, leads us to the next point, which is confusion, right?
Yeah.
So the next point being,
promoting honor, not chaos. Oops. Looks like we lost Bondor. Let's see here. We'll give him 2 seconds here, but it's basically the fourth principle was promoting order and not chaos. We got you, Bondor?
Yeah. How much of that did you miss?
Like all of it.
Oh man.
We were just getting ready to start principle 4.
Okay, let me see what my internet connection is on. I'll switch.
Let's see if we got him back here. I can just start. So basically promoting order, not chaos. This is something that, the Apostle Paul talks about. I mean, you can go right back to the beginning. I mean, if you go back to Genesis, you have God creating the world. He creates a space and then he orders the space. God, there we go. Yeah. So God creates a space and then he orders it. He, basically he puts things into it in a certain arrangement. And then people themselves, God creates them to be divinely sanctioned orderers. He wants us to go out into the world and bring order. So part of that is, bringing animals into submission. Part of that is, bringing things like crops into submission. This is one of the things that we do. We don't just depend on, in order to continue to eat our food, we don't just depend on foraging and being able to just find random stuff. We basically bring crops and all these things in animals that we rely on for food. We bring them into submission to our will. And so we try to, basically bring them to a certain place. We want to make that place as well ordered towards the production of food and towards the production of benefit to others as is possible. And so again, that's just, going back as far as you can in the scripture, you see that. But again, we could go through 100 different examples of where God, desires that people bring order to the world. Another example, one of the fruits of the Spirit is self-control. God, he has a will.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, exactly. You have the Lord's Prayer. The disciples asked Jesus how they ought to pray, and the first thing that Jesus does is he basically provides a telos for prayer and for the operation of the world. He basically says, pray and work that my kingdom come, or that God's kingdom will come and His will be done. So all of these things are providing order, and money itself in the paying of taxes is one limited but real step towards the promotion of order within a society.
Indeed. Yeah. Okay. So that's point 4.
Yep.
Final principle, honoring authority as a witness now. Okay. So in Titus 3:1-2, Paul exhorts believers to be submissive to rulers and authorities, to be obedient, to be ready for every good work, to speak evil of no one. Our respect for authority serves as a testimony to the transforming power of the gospel. Now, as Americans, I'm like, whoa, but it's also, we have an interesting situation in America because we're a republic. Our government's ultimate authority is I think you might be muted on there.
Wait, Bondor. I thought we were a democracy. What is this? What is this that I'm hearing?
Oh, geez. So our ultimate authority is the Constitution. Consequently, it's not, rulers and the rulers that we elect.
Yeah.
It's a weird, different dynamic. That doesn't mean the government, is not subject to these biblical principles and the rest of it. And that's also probably a whole nother discussion. However,
it is. Yeah.
Give honor again.
Yeah.
This is a witness. You can just post on Twitter all day. This is all.
Yeah.
Absurd. We hate you, etc. You are abdicating duty, etc. Blah blah blah. I mean, you could do that if you wanted to, because our republic establishes that. But doing it tactfully, doing it as a good witness is important, right? You can't just be out there. You need to be able to speak truth, but you can't be out there completely in disrespect of everything.
Yeah, obviously. And again, this is something that is not something that you have the excuse of, I have really bad rulers, and so I don't need to show them any type of honor. Obviously, honor can look different, and we're going to get into that. But there definitely should be some sort of honor. And there's clearly example of, the Apostle Paul is wrongfully accused. He's standing before Felix, in the book of Acts. And he still shows a degree of respect to them. There's 100 things that we're going to get into, but yes, this is a definite principle. And again, this is another thing that we basically, if you're not showing this type of honor, you are harming your witness. Like this is a very real thing as well. So we agree. Now, what in the world? What do these have to do with Bitcoin, Bondor?
What is this Bitcoin thing? Okay, so now let's consider how Bitcoin potentially violates these principles. Likewise, we have 5 points: designed for circumvention, undermining monetary authority, enabling tax evasion, promoting financial anarchy, and countercultural witness. Okay, so first one, designed for circumvention. Bitcoin was explicitly created as a response to the 2008 financial crisis, with its anonymous creator declaring an intent to create a system that operates outside government monetary control. As the Bitcoin white paper states, it enables, quote, payments to be sent directly from one party to another without going through a financial institution or intermediary, end quote. Deliberately circumventing divinely established authorities, right?
I mean, it sounds pretty open and shut case there, Bondor. I mean, how will we get around that? I mean, that's that's pretty rough. I mean, there's pretty well established case that Bitcoin is created to be a money that government couldn't create more units of, so it's outside of their bounds in terms of monetary creation. It certainly has been custodied and can be custodied in such a way as to render authorities unable to access it. I mean, that seems like a pretty open and shut case,
And
honestly.
it's a design for circumvention, right?
Yeah.
So we have a Federal Reserve Act. We have which fundamentally amounts to a national currency overseen by the Federal Reserve, and that is what the law of the land says goes in our country, right? And Bitcoin basically says, nah, we're just nah. So that's a real problem.
Yep.
Okay.
Real deal. Okay. Second problem here.
Undermining monetary authority, getting back into the Federal Reserve concept. Throughout scripture and history, the minting of currency has been recognized as a legitimate function of government. To paraphrase Luther's sermon on Matthew 22:15-22, the authorities have the right to issue money and to regulate the currency. Bitcoin directly challenges this sovereign right by creating a parallel monetary system outside government oversight. And this is like the fundamental true principle of Bitcoin. When people think about the Bitcoin network and they talk about and they describe how Bitcoin works, and you look at the code, you read the code, this is how it works. You can any country can decide to destroy and block Bitcoin within their jurisdiction, but that has no effect on Bitcoin because Bitcoin exists in every jurisdiction outside of jurisdiction. Like the fundamental, you take a circle, that's your border, right? Everything inside the circle is within the jurisdiction. Everything outside the circle is outside the jurisdiction, and therefore there's nothing that anyone inside the jurisdiction can do about it. But that's the area that Bitcoin lives in. So this is a very challenging subject to be able to reconcile this, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Basically, Bitcoin operates internationally. It operates at a level that is beyond the control of any government, of any one government, or even all governments. Like we've seen examples of this. Again, you could look at this. A lot of us, and we would say this as we'd frame this as a positive thing. But I mean, the CCP in China has banned Bitcoin 7 times in the last 15 years. They've clearly recognized that this is some degree of a threat to their national sovereignty, some degree of a threat to what they're trying to do there, and so they've obviously tried to ban it and prevent their citizens from using it and benefiting from it. So yeah, it definitely, the fact that they haven't been able to ban it is actually, or they haven't been able to functionally actually ban it. You can declare we ban this, but to actually enforce that ban is a far different thing. And so, Bitcoin hasn't been able to, they haven't been able to actually enforce the ban that they've put in place many times.
So because of this dynamic, we get into point 3, which is tax evasion. Bitcoin's pseudonymous design makes transactions difficult to trace, potentially facilitating tax avoidance. This stands in direct opposition to Christ's commands to render to Caesar and Paul's instructions in Romans 13:7 to pay to all what is owed to them, taxes to whom taxes, etc. So again, because of this larger dynamic, it is enabling, if you will. It's not to say it's commanding, certainly not commanding, but it's enabling behavior that is antithetical to what we've already outlined the Bible says. So this is we're really, this is, do we want to participate, right?
Yeah.
Like, we should be asking ourselves, do we want to participate at this point in time?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's, again, this enables evil. There are people who will use Bitcoin and who have and who will continue to use Bitcoin to evade taxes. Is the fact that someone is doing that justification for everyone not using it? That's a good question.
Which we will probably address later.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. All right. 4. Point 4.
Promoting financial anarchy. The Reformed tradition has consistently emphasized that God is a God of order. Jonathan Edwards wrote that government is very essential to the preservation of the peace and the welfare of mankind. Bitcoin's decentralized structure deliberately rejects this hierarchical authority in the financial realm, potentially fostering disorder rather than the peace Christians are called to seek. So again, now we're looking at the implications of this. Okay, well, if you have, like we've already discussed, if you have multiple currencies, you're going to have a disordered, a chaotic environment and system. Consequently, this is antithetical to the pursuit and nature of what God wants, which is order. He wants he's built creation in an ordered fashion. He loves order. He wants to pursue order. And this is standing in contrast of that, because it's, oh, do I pay in this? Do I pay in that? Like what is what am I doing here? Like, how much is it, or what was it, or does it change? Going back to the volatility thing yesterday, it was like, well, what's the price? Like, how are the prices? Like, this is such a big waste of time.
Yeah.
On top of the fact that it's a waste of time because it's disordered. And when you're introducing the disorder, well, you're introducing something that's antithetical to what God's nature is and how we as Christians should interact with reality. So,
yeah, exactly. Don't have anything to add. It's pretty straightforward. Okay. And then lastly, so counter-cultural witness.
Indeed. Christians are called to be exemplary citizens whose respect for authority serves as a testimony. As Augustine taught, the Christian is to be a model citizen. By embracing a currency designed to operate outside government oversight, believers may be undermining their witness to a watching world.
Yeah, you're basically acting as though there's a greater authority than the existing monetary one. You're proclaiming that their monetary authority and in so doing, their authority more broadly is not absolute. And so obviously this can be taken as rebellion against the government. There certainly are tons of examples of governments taking action, taking, receiving or interpreting certain actions like what Bitcoin does as though they are inherently evil and something to be squashed rather than endured or put up with.
Yep.
All right. So again, that is our Steelman case against Bitcoin on the grounds that Bitcoin subverts governmental authority. Okay. Now, I know there's some of you that are listening right now who are freaking out. You're screaming at your screen right now. You're thinking, wait a second, what about this? What about this? This doesn't seem like a very good case. There's probably other ones of you who are listening to this and you're like, yeah, pretty open and shut. This is why I don't like Bitcoin. This is why no one should like Bitcoin.
We can turn the podcast off at this point, actually.
Exactly. Yeah. For a lot of you, for Peter Schiff, for what's his name? Dave Ramsey, a bunch of these guys, they're like, yeah, it's pretty good. Bondor, let's hear another way. Let's hear another perspective. All right. So let's hear.
Indeed.
Let's start refuting here. I'll let you start.
So I'm going to start with a quote. Actually, I'm reorganizing this a little bit on the fly, but I'm going to start with a quote. This is a Keller quote from a sermon that he wrote in 1989.
Pastor Tim Keller, former pastor of Redeemer Presbyterian Church in New York City. He's since gone to be with the Lord. Go for it.
And I heard this years ago, and it is just, this is it, I think. Okay. But it's a long quote, so bear with me.
Yeah.
How do airplanes fly? Somebody obeyed the laws of aerodynamics. Somebody built the plane in just such a way and shaped it in such a way, and the pilot flies it in such a way so that the air pressure, underneath it's heavier than the air pressure above. I don't understand how it works. It's incredible. Every time I get into an airplane, I say, this will never get off the ground. Tons and tons of metal. It's ridiculous to think that this will ever fly, but it does because someone fastidiously obeyed certain laws. Right? Now,
that's fantastic quote.
I know. Here's how it applies to this argument. Physics does not operate on human decree. Okay? So God has, point one, there's basically 6 points to the refutation. I think it cuts to the core of the argument. God created point one, God created the universe and its laws. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Genesis 1:1. The laws of mathematics, information, physics, energy, and thermodynamics are divine creations that precede any human government. They precede all of humanity, right?
Yep. Yeah. So this is one of these things where the fact that the fact that a human action goes against, a certain something that the government says is not sufficient information to know whether or not it's not sufficient to know the moral character of that action. Okay. It could very well be an evil action, or it might not be. It actually might be it might be in accordance with this larger, this larger, more fundamental ordering and law, which God preordained or created before the foundation of the world, basically to govern the world.
So with the ordering in mind, we can create a hierarchy, which is point 2. God establishes an authority hierarchy. All authority comes from God, Romans 13:1. But Scripture clearly demonstrates a hierarchy of authority with God at the top, followed by his created order, then human institutions, government, church, family, etc. Now, this is important. It may not be explicitly stated like this in the Bible. I mean, it is explicitly stated, but it's
not all at once, basically.
You basically, it's the logic of it that speaks. God created logic. He created the universe in this way, and the logic of it dictates that, well, if the government has the authority over physics, then the government can just tell us what the physics is and change physics, and we're going to pass a law that changes physics, and that's like, we know that's absurd. There's no possible way that will ever be true. Right? Yeah.
And we also know, again, this is where the doctrine of again, if you're not a Christian or you're a new Christian, this is where we would call it the doctrine of hamartiology comes into play here. Hamartiology is the doctrine of sin. So the fact, it's not just that God made a world and we're living in this perfect, this perfect world that's humming along just like God intended it. The reality is that humankind since the beginning has been tempted to be a rival to God, to try to basically get outside of these governing constraints that God has put on the world and replace them with ones that make sense to ourselves, ones that are more convenient towards a small group of people. And so this is also something we have to know about the world. This is why it's not just as simple as, the governing authority, who again is put there by God, did X thing, and thus it's justified. They're justified in doing that thing. We need more information than that. And so this is something that's very important to take into account, and we're going to get into specifically why and how this specifically affects.
Yeah. So looking at point 3, which is natural law transcends human government. This point speaks directly to that, and it addresses. It goes straight through the what Jesus said, render unto Caesar.
Yep.
He simultaneously, and you can speak to this way better than I can, but he simultaneously says, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, but render unto God what is God's.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
We're now talking about this structure of authority, right?
Yes. Yeah. And so this is something that now, first of all, there's a number of things here. This passage is one of the most bastardized, abused things in all of the Bible. Because it seems so obvious. This is something that it seems so straightforwardly obvious what he's saying, but the context of this passage matters immensely. We don't just interpret the scriptures based on we're seeing certain words. In order to understand words, you need a larger context. Usually, most of the time, a sentence is not even sufficient. You need the context of an even larger. You need a larger context, and so a paragraph is often described as being the smallest unit of interpretation that you ought to try to interpret with. So what's going on in this passage is that you have the Pharisees and I believe the Sadducees are there too, and they're basically trying to put Jesus to death. Okay, they're trying to catch Jesus in the middle of this in a trap, basically. And I can't remember if we talked about this the last time, but the trap is I think this was with somebody else. This is another episode or another interview I did. But the trap basically is they asked Jesus, is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar, or pay tribute to Caesar or not? Okay. So now Jesus is going to give obviously one of two answers. He's either going to say, yes, okay, it is lawful for specifically Jewish people to pay tribute to Caesar. And then what is going to be the consequence of this? Okay. The consequence is going to be that the people are going to be upset because basically this coin that they were designed to pay tribute with had basically made a blasphemous statement asserting the deity of Tiberius, basically this governor of Rome. And so basically by saying that this was lawful, he would be interpreted as Jesus condoning idolatry, basically. This guy claiming to be God who has no business being God. This is something that had happened in the past. There'd been a revolt. I can't remember the guy's name offhand, but another Jewish guy had led a revolt against Rome on the basis of paying this tribute, and Rome squashed it. That guy was killed. A bunch of his followers were killed. It was not good news for the Jews. So then the other side of this, though, is if Jesus says, no, it's not lawful to pay tribute to Caesar, then the Jews are the Pharisees are going to turn around. They're going to go tell Caesar that this guy Jesus is condoning a tax revolt, and then he's going to be put to death there. And so this is something where either the Jewish people who up to this point had neglected the Pharisees to follow after Jesus and were big fans of his, were either going to be upset with Jesus, or the Roman governing authorities were going to be upset with him. So that is what's going on in this passage. That's the point of asking this question. Now, Jesus's response, okay, render to Caesar what belongs to Caesar and render to God what belongs to God, is equally jaw-droppingly brilliant, because what Jesus is saying is that it's what is the logic going on here? So you have the logic of what bears Caesar's image or what belongs to Caesar? The coin. Okay, this coin showed a picture of Caesar's face. On the back of it, it showed what is believed to be Caesar's mother, Tiberius's mother, and so this is something that is going on. Basically, this thing bears his image. Now, the question that we all ought to ask, that's the far bigger thing going on here, is who bears God's image? Okay, this thing, give to God what belongs to God. Give to God the things that bear God's image. Well, that's people, right? Mm-hmm. So the danger here is that what were the Pharisees actually trying to do? They were trying to give the object or the thing that bore God's image to Caesar. Okay, now in what sense? Well, they were trying to turn Jesus over to Caesar. Okay, and by asking about taxes, which is where you take something that bears Caesar's image and you give it over to him, they were actually trying, in reality, to take something that bore God's image and illicitly give it over to Caesar. So they were actually trying to do an illicit tax by doing this. And so Jesus catches on, and he basically reveals to them how wicked they're being. So again, this is not of it. Exactly. It's this wicked satanic inversion of what the order of taxes ought to be. And so this is something where this is not at all whatsoever a broad sweeping defense of any and all taxes. Okay. Many people take this as that way. And they could not be more wrong. It's called eisegesis, where you're reading your own beliefs into a scriptural passage. This is not a good thing. Christians ought not do it. Nobody should do it. And this is something that a lot of people do. So that's not at all what's going on here. What's actually going on in the passage matters a ton. And so again, when Jesus says this, he's not speaking to all people everywhere, speaking to all situations in all times, in all places. The scriptures say that, I believe it's the apostle Peter, I believe, says that all scripture is written for our benefit. Okay, all scripture is written for us, but not all scripture is written to us. So in the same way that when we read the Old Testament and it talks about prohibiting, certain types of fabrics that have multiple types of fabrics or not ingredients, whatever the word is that I'm looking for. The fact that there's multiple types of things being woven together to make these fabrics. That was prohibited for the Jews. That is not prohibited for Gentiles, and especially now in the New Testament, it's not prohibited at all. Same thing would go with some of the dietary restrictions. So the context matters. It really matters when you're trying to apply these things, and a lot of people do a very poor job. So again, this is something we have to recognize. We have to do a little bit more work if we're going to faithfully understand what it means to render unto Caesar and to render unto God as well. While we're talking about that.
Yep. So, and I think that kind of brings us into the fourth point. Again, so we saw this inversion where they wanted to render what was God's
Yep.
created image. They wanted to render that to the government. They are basically saying, in so many words, they're saying the government is above God's created order.
Correct.
And that's not, and then, you know, this is where you kind of get the problem with that you're just describing. Like, if we're just going to apply this, all taxes are always good, they should always be paid by Christians all the time, you kind of get into the same problem of, well, the government is actually over the created order. And like, it's a really messy, like, let's try and avoid that. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then, we'll go.
Yeah, I'll add one more thing, because this is again, there's a lot of people who this gets them really nervous, because you're like, well, what constitutes, what does this look like? And there's a famous Christian theologian thinker. His name is Greg Bonson. And one of the things that Greg Bonson talked about is he talks about taxes. He talked about this render to Caesar passage. And one of the things that he says is, if any government ever tries to advocate a 90% tax, you are duty bound as a Christian to disobey them. Now, why would you think that? What would that be based on? What's the logic there? You have any idea what the logic is? I'm asking you. Yeah.
Probably something to do with that's essentially your tithe is your 10%. And then the rest of that is your life. It's all of your life.
So basically God, now again, we can get into debates about tithing versus giving and the difference between old covenant and new covenant, all that kind of stuff. We could easily do that conversation. But his tongue-in-cheek logic is, listen, God requires 10%. So if the government ever tries to infringe on this percentage that is designed to be given to God alone, you ought to feel no guilt for refusing to obey them, because they are trying to supersede their bounds of their authority that God has designed, and try to, infringe on the territory and the authority that belongs to God alone. Now, he also says it's not even that simple, right? Because the Apostle Paul says that if anyone fails to provide for his own family, he's denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Okay, this is not to say that every unbeliever, person who's not a Christian, is the worst person, as bad as they could possibly be. But it's basically saying, like, you've denied the faith. You're not even doing the basics of what it is to be a Christian. Yeah. So that basically means, all right, now how much do we? So we have 10%. Then plus whatever I need to provide for my family. We could also go further, whatever I need to be able to be generous and give to God's people. So you really get to the standpoint, you get to the point where you actually need a lot more. And that's less and less of a justification of an ever growing tax burden that should be put on to people. This is something arguing actually against that, while it might initially seem to be arguing for greater taxes.
That's a fantastic point. Okay. but jumping back.
Yes.
Okay. So again, with the inversion thing, this is important to note because Bitcoin functions within God's created order. Fiat and government authority over money operates under government order.
All right. Unpack that. What does that mean?
Yeah, this is where we get into the nitty-gritty here. Bitcoin operates according to immutable mathematical principles and thermodynamic laws established by God at creation. These principles, cryptography, mathematical scarcity, and energy conservation or energy conversion, and predicated on energy conservation and thermodynamics and the rest of it, are not human inventions. So Bitcoin is not necessarily a human invention, though of course it was written by humans. It is a discovery of God's created reality. In particular, proof of work is the discovery of the bridge between information and energy. These are essentially two different domains that are bridged through proof of work. This is one of the maybe we'll get into this at a later time, but this is one of the reasons why proof of work is such an incredible thing.
Yeah. So how does that contrast? Why don't you just unpack for people who aren't aware? Like, how does that contrast with, fiat currency and stuff like that? What's the difference there? Why is that a big deal?
Right. So a fiat currency, I mean, it takes a while for a fiat currency to develop reasonably and for people to actually believe it. But if we want to get into the theories of money and all the rest of that, but let's just try and keep it simple in terms of fiat. Like our current paradigm of money, which is essentially a state theory of money, a state version of money. We are in, modern monetary theory world of the government determines what the money is. The government can print money. The government has the aircraft carriers that they can buy with the money they print, and then use the aircraft carriers to commit violence against anybody who decides that it's not real money, right? That's essentially the in broad strokes, and there's a lot more nuance to it, of course.
Sure.
But that's essentially the dynamic of government money. We are using our stroke of a pen or type on a keyboard to create a money that we say is the legal form of transactionable economic value.
Yeah.
And then, we're enforcing that with the threat of violence. That is essentially a fiat money. So we're talking about this can only ever exist under a government authority, because if you become external to that government authority, well, who's in control of the aircraft carrier, or who's going to believe that your money has value? It's just, you get into these weird dynamics, right?
Yeah.
It's a very
you get into these things where
position.
Exactly. It's the difference between, so what you're describing is it's the difference between a naturally governed free market chosen, people choosing this thing because it actually has characteristics that actually benefit them, versus a top-down artificial forced valuation of something that normal market actors would never voluntarily choose. Right? That's the difference between natural money and something like fiat currencies. The other thing is that fiat currencies don't ever just happen. They basically you kind of slide down into them. Basically, you start with a scarce currency. You start with a market valued currency, and then basically it degrades over time in order to give governments and bankers. It's more convenient and benefits them, and so that's generally why they've happened over time.
Mm-hmm. And this is a product. So fiat currency in some respects is a product of a gold currency or a commodity based currency, because in the case of a currency that is money, or a currency that is metal, in that case the metal is cumbersome to transact with, and so it makes far more sense, and it's just insecure, right? Like a guy with a gun is just going to take your gold, and you can't have your gold on your person all the time. Consequently, it makes more sense to keep it at a trusted, secure location, also known as a bank. And then the bank issues you a note that says, okay, well, you have 100 ounces of gold on reserve, so you can buy things with that gold, and then the people you buy the things with, because we'll give you a note and it's a bearer bond, and then they can come and withdraw from your stack of gold, and oh, okay, cool, now it's just paper money. And then that's how fiat comes about, with the next innovation, which is, well, if we never withdraw the gold, why can't we just print the paper? And just use that, right? Yeah.
So the paper currency starts as a substitute for an amount of gold or silver. This is how it happens. It's created to overcome some of the weaknesses or the constraints of gold or silver or other tangible monies. And so then you use this paper representation, but over time, people use and get used to the convenience of the paper representation, and to the point that they're never exchanging the representation for gold. So then you end up with a situation which is what we have right now, where we've completely moved away from a backed currency, a scarce, scarce, um, what is it called? Scarce bearer instrument currency in favor of one that is that only has value because a government or central bank has declared it to have value. And to your earlier point, they threaten, they basically back the value of that currency with the threat of violence, either to put you in jail for using some other thing, or to on a national level if there's a nation that won't play ball with what they want to do.
Yeah. So again, Bitcoin functions within God's created order. This is the only way that you can have the dynamic of, you can shut down, like we were mentioning earlier, you can shut down Bitcoin within your own borders, but you can't shut down Bitcoin universally because you don't have authority over the created order. When you don't have the authority over the creative order, and okay, you can see how this is getting important, because Bitcoin is not under the government's authority. Bitcoin supersedes the government's authority, just as, taking it even in a higher level, just as all technology is. So point 5, technology implements divine order. When humans develop technology that faithfully and fastidiously follows, utilizes, or relies on God's natural laws, this technology operates within a sphere of authority that predates and transcends mere government decree. This is not a discussion on usage. All technology is neutral and can be used for good or evil. It is a discussion on authority.
We will argue at a future date whether or not technology is neutral. But for this point, this is there's truthfulness here. So here's what we do want to look at is the other thing along with this is that frequently technology is utilized to overcome. Sometimes it's just used to overcome human weakness for good ends, right? This is obviously the truth, or I guess for evil ends. Sometimes this is designed. Technology enables people to be lazy, or technology enables other wickedness. But there's also a very real sense in which technology can be utilized for the glory of God and to pursue these larger, more foundational ends for which God created the world. And so this is one of these things where if we look at governments and we look at something like the printing press enabled people who were teaching the scriptures, but who were being portrayed as criminals, as whatever, as haters of God and man, whatever. Like the printing press allowed them to expand and get their message out in a way that would not have been anywhere near as feasible prior to the creation of the printing press. In a similar way, there's plenty of, as one example, there's plenty of nations around the world that have forbidden the preaching of the gospel, that have tried to make it very difficult for Christians to move and minister in those places. And as one example of this, there's many countries, due to some of those reasons, or because there's been terrorism, quote unquote terrorism or whatever, where the United States or these other governments have chosen to cut themselves off from the SWIFT system, the dollar system around the world. And even in those places, okay, where these governmental monies aren't able to be used, aren't able to be sent, where there's cut off of monetary communication from these places, Bitcoin is still able to be sent to these places. And so Bitcoin is being used and can be used to send money to gospel missionaries and gospel workers all over the world in ways that can't be, or are far more resistant to government intervention than many other currencies. And so again, there's in the same way that there are totally legitimate from a Christian standpoint and from and just an ethical standpoint more broadly, government authority is not absolute. And so government monetary authority and government constraints over what ought to be or ought not to be paid is also not absolute. And Bitcoin is a great tool that allows, people to act against unjust usage or unjust abuses of authority.
And that again takes us to our 6th point, which is tying back to proper submission. right? And I mean, and also, I think this is our last point. We have a conclusion as well, but this also ties into, so we have proper submission, and then also God caring about order. Look, if we're just elevating a government currency out of order, then we're not caring about God's order.
Correct.
Right? And then also submission. Submission recognizes the proper authority.
Yep.
Submission recognizes the hierarchy of authority. This is why, as your point earlier about the 90% tax, it's like, no, you have no, the government has no authority to do that, because that is infringing on a higher authority.
Correct.
Consequently, it is within Christian ethic and within prudent, fastidious submission to order to rebel against that 90% tax, because it is out of order. It is a introduction of chaos.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and this is something, again, we can this is not a consideration or an objection that only applies to Bitcoin, because again, if you look at the Constitution talks about gold and silver as the only currencies that are acceptable for the settling of debts, and so to try to move away from that is something that, it did happen, but it's actually unconstitutional. Moving away from, and again, the point then that many people raise is, well, that outlaws Bitcoin too, and it's like, okay. Well, why are gold and silver mentioned? That question matters a lot in Bitcoin.
Yeah.
If Bitcoin had existed, then basically it functions very similarly, and would be, it can be treated and thought of. There's an easy argument to be made to be draw equivalence between those two things. So yes, absolutely agreed. Okay, concluding.
The conclusion. Okay. Rather than Bitcoin subverting proper authority, governments that reject sound money principles that are themselves subverting God's higher authority. If we truly believe in biblical submission to rightly ordered authority, not only should we ourselves use Bitcoin as money, we ourselves should be advocating that governments subject themselves to God's created order by adopting Bitcoin's monetary standard and abolish all attempts to have authority over currency.
Ooh. Oh man.
Now, this is interesting on very many levels. The first one that's coming to mind for me right now is the fact that this was essentially, I mean, I guess when the international gold standard was in effect, they had some of this, like it was the right ordering of things. And that's probably speaks to why the world operated so functionally on a international gold standard. Mm-hmm. But since we've gone into fiat world, it's bonkers town. It's total chaos, endless war, complete inequality, all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, this really is very interesting. So now it's not just, it's okay to do. It's like, hey, is this actually something that Christians and everyone, is this something that we should actually actively seek out? Because again, this is obviously there's a number of things. Any scarce currency, basically any scarce currency is licit in this large sense, right? If you're basically trying to use a currency that is completely, where you are the only governor of how many units exist, like that is, we ought to object to that on the basis of the fact that if you're the person creating the system, like you're not God. Like you're not designed to be the end all be all, this thing where you're creating the rules. Now, with that being said, as we mentioned, all these other things, whether it's shells or whatever, those things can be used. Okay, those things are licit in this larger sense, but there are ways in which these other systems are far more easily corruptible than something like Bitcoin. So we saw what happened with the gold standard. We've seen this happen all throughout human history. Basically there's a number of things that make gold inconvenient, difficult to use, unwieldy to use. It's very difficult to spend small amounts of it, and so you have to concede the usage of something like silver, which is 20 times less scarce than gold. And it's just a whole bunch of issues that make it basically gold and silver weak, that basically makes them unideal, and it ought not to be a surprise when they break down and are abused in the ways that the fiat monetary systems abuse them. With that being said, Bitcoin is in many ways able to overcome basically every single one of these weaknesses that gold and silver have, and that other monetary units have. They do introduce a few new difficulties, but those trade-offs are good ones, are beneficial ones in the broad majority of cases. Again, you do have some contingencies with Bitcoin. You're contingent. Its usage is contingent upon electricity. There are people using shortwave or like ham radios to do Bitcoin transactions. So that's one way. But theoretically, I mean, you need electricity. If something were to happen to electricity, that wouldn't be ideal. But again, so there are trade-offs, but Bitcoin is better money and operates in a more sustainable way, in a more beneficial way, especially in a global world. I can send money across the world in seconds for basically no fee. I mean, it's incredibly beneficial, but it's not a panacea either. There's definitely situations in which Bitcoin is it. All of these things, money is a good tool, but none of these things are. Or we're not trying to claim anything to the contrary. That none of these things are absolute, valuable, absolutely beneficial in every possible case. But it still is far more. It still is very desirable and very valuable, especially to Christians. So it ought not to be hated on or rejected hastily.
Yeah, it's worth, as JD says, double clicking on one of the interior points there, which
Shout to JD.
Yeah, which is the idea that you want to have a equal weights and measures in your currency. Mm-hmm. This is a Christian ethic that's well established in the Bible, and it basically says, like, okay, cool. If you have these qualities, you can elevate that as money, and that is well within God's preordained, created order that He says is right and good. Now, I don't know if you can hear the lawnmower behind me. That's really really
I can't.
nice.
You're good.
Okay, good. Now, if you elevate something that agrees with that order, well, you're well within, what the Bible says, what the Christian ethic says is correct ordering, right? Mm-hmm. But when you elevate something that is not in agreement with that, in our case, it would be fiat currency, you're going to have a real difficult time reconciling that. Yep. A 1 USD today does not equal 1 USD tomorrow because of inflation, because they print money in the meantime. Inflation happens, the value of your money, the purchasing power goes down, the cost of goods goes up. This is a disconnect from God's well-defined created order. With the measure you use, it will be measured back to you. Okay. Now, when you elevate something that is, so Bitcoin does this at two levels. It is elevated because it's the technological solution to the problem at hand, which we've discussed. And then it's also within the Christian ethic that God defines as, hey, these are the things that you can elevate. Like we see gold elevated to that position historically because of the same reasons. It's hard. It's extremely hard to print gold. Now, gold has problems with other stuff, like as we've already mentioned.
Yeah. Yep.
But even within like the ethic of gold, like, oh, we elevate gold to this money because it's very hard to print. It has the 1 to 2% annual inflation, and that was essentially never going to go above 2% unless we start mining asteroids, which is really neither here nor there. Yeah. But it's still it's not a perfect. It's like the Old Testament sacrifices. This is not a perfect sacrifice. We recognize that there's something, we're missing something.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And here we have Bitcoin that actually is the fulfillment of what this, and it's the first time in human history that there's actually been something that can actually fulfill that apart from the extremely rare circumstances where you had a closed economy that was predicated on something like gold or silver, where there was no inputs to silver, and the consequences there were that it had a 0% inflation of the circulating currency. So the measure of value that they used was not inflating, and that would be well within the Christian ethic, the God's created order of how things should be ordered.
Yeah, and again, to this point again, like this is something we just take for granted because we've never even had to really think about. We've gone through generations without having to really think about what money is. In Christians, we've been taught this or prioritized this, but again, something becoming money is a natural, like throughout human history, has been a natural process in the vast majority of cases. Like people choose something as money because there's certain properties or characteristics, that this thing has that actually are beneficial and desirable for them, and they basically choose this. This is something where, and Bitcoin actually is desirable. People are voluntarily choosing it. We jokingly, I think on one of the last episodes, we talked about how, I'll never forgive Nayib Bukele for taking this incredible illustration away from me, which is that up until they made Bitcoin legal tender, every single Bitcoin transaction had been voluntary. Like it had been people just looked for a helper. They looked for a currency to solve a problem that they had. And they looked around at the available options, looked at Bitcoin and said, hey, I choose that thing. I choose this will actually solve a problem for me. And so they chose to do that. It didn't need to, basically no one has been forced to, just against their will adopt Bitcoin. And you can even argue with El Salvador if people actually had to take it. You could theoretically be thrown in jail or something probably if you're a giant business and you refuse to obey by this order. But in the vast majority of situations, even if somebody were to object,
USD, so
yeah, exactly, yeah, they were forced to do that, yeah. But yeah, so this is something where it really is like we're moving back to a situation in which we're having to really think about why we're doing what we're doing. We've talked about this on a number of different levels. Like we are in this point of definitional crisis where nobody knows what anything is, including money. And so this is something where a lot of Christians ought to be asking. Christians are thoughtful people. Again, there's plenty of people who aren't Christians who are thoughtful. Like, I'm not saying that. Like as Christians, you're called to use the reasoning facilities that God has given you to steward them well. And so you ought to care a lot about doing that and about, structuring and ordering your life, especially if there's something like money that is so influential and touches so many parts of our life. Like everything that you do in your life almost is touched by money in some way. And so this really is this entire topic is a very important, very impactful, and one that thoughtful people everywhere ought to give much closer consideration to. Well, Bandor, thank you so much for your preparation on this and for helping us think through these things. Again, we mentioned last time we're going to be getting into I don't know why we mentioned this last time because we weren't even going to do it, but I guess we did. Okay, we'll cut that out. We'll get that out once the published version. But Bandor, why don't you just tell the audience what is going to be our next episode? What are we going to be talking about?
So coming up next, we have The Widow's Mite, Bitcoin's accessibility and economic injustice. I know you're excited about that one. I'm excited as well.
That is going to be a great one. Yeah. So again, a lot of people, when they think about Bitcoin, they think, well, Bitcoin is just something for very rich people in the United States.
Or only tech bros. Tech bros can understand that.
Only tech bros. Not even tech girls can understand. Only bros. Nothing could be further from the truth, and we're going to get into that in the next episode of the Against Bitcoin series on the Thank God for Bitcoin podcast. I also want to just remind the audience we are again by this. We should still have time by the time this episode airs. TGFB. We talked with the core TGFB community, and we talked to them about should we do a full 2-day big conference in Vegas, the way that we've done, piggybacking off of the large Bitcoin conferences, Bitcoin Magazine conferences in the past. We have, again, just a number of them who basically said, I don't really want to do a full conference in Vegas people have past, people have histories, and places like Vegas, can feed into the worst impulses of people. And so we just, wanted to take that seriously. So we just said, all right, we won't do a full 2-day event like that. But what we decided to do, because some of us were going to be there anyhow, we said, hey, let's do some sort of get together for both people who are in the TGFB community who are going to be nearby, and for a bunch of our friends who work in the Bitcoin industry. Like, let's do an event where we can, hang out with them and provide them a good place, to hang out together. So we, on May 27th, are going to be doing, it's a Tuesday, are going to be doing the TGFB Friends and Family Barbecue in Las Vegas. You can find tickets at tgfb.com/store. You can also find more information via the pinned tweet on our TGFB Twitter account. You're going to have smoked brisket, pulled pork. I think there's going to be some other meat as well. You're going to have sides. You're going to have wine. Ben Justman from Peony Lane Wine is going to be there serving us. You're going to be able to buy wine as well to take home with you to your churches, potentially, if you take if you use wine for the Lord's Supper, or just your wife for a little stay-at-home date. You can do any of these things. Jimmy Song's going to be there. Bitcoin Mechanic is going to be there. There's going to be a whole bunch of people who I'm not going to mention, who are well-known Bitcoin folks who are going to be there. So we'd love to have you. You can find out more information. Grab your tickets. Tickets are super limited. I think we sold something like at least 30 tickets. There's only 100 total. So go grab them before they're gone. People always wait to the last minute to buy the tickets. I want to, again, I don't really want to do this, but I partially want to do them great bodily injury for stressing my nerves and making me wait till the very end. But again, it's fine. But go grab your tickets, and we'd love to see you in Vegas on the 27th. And so that's the end of this episode. We'll love to see you on the next episode of the TGFB podcast.
Thanks.